We are going to focus on communities, focus on issues which continue the freedoms which are connected to the long walk to freedom of Nelson Mandela.
Their love story surprised many. A former First Lady of Mozambique, marrying South Africa's most beloved elder statesman, 27 years older than her. People talked. Some questioned her intentions, but very few truly understood what they had, or what it cost to love a man admired by millions. Now, at 80, Graça Machel, Nelson Mandela's ex-wife, finally speaks up about Mandela and reveals what we all suspected. Join us in this video as we look through the eyes of the woman who loved him through it all. Fated for each other, how they met. Graça Machel and Nelson Mandela's paths crossed in the most simplistic forms ever. It didn't happen under bright lights or in front of cameras. It was quiet. The kind of quiet, powerful people long for when they can simply be human, away from the weight of expectations. They met in the mid-1990s at a conference focused on peace and reconciliation. Mandela had just stepped down after his historic term as South Africa's first black president. Graça, already a respected figure across southern Africa, had long stepped out of the shadow of her late husband, Graça Machel. At first, there was no grand romance, just respect. But it was the kind of respect that runs deep. Both had lived through struggle, revolution, exile, and personal loss. Both had sacrificed time with family for the sake of freedom. They understood each other in ways few people could. That day, their conversation stayed on the surface. Children's rights, education, and regional cooperation. But beneath the policy talk, something else was quietly taking shape. A connection, not built on politics, but on shared pain and a quiet, unspoken understanding. From there, their relationship grew slowly and privately. Letters were exchanged. Quiet dinners followed. What began as admiration slowly turned into affection, and then into something deeper. To the outside world, their relationship came as a surprise. Mandela is now 80. Graça was 27 years younger. She was a widow, a leader, and a public figure in her own right. Naturally, people talked. There were whispers, questions, doubts. Was it real love? Was it too soon after his separation from Winnie Madikizela Mandela? What did Graça stand to gain? But none of that seemed to matter to them. For Mandela, Graça brought something he deeply needed: stability, wisdom, and emotional grounding. For the first time in years, he wasn't just returning home from prison. He was finding rest from the exhausting demands of being a global symbol. And for Graça, Mandela was something rare. A partner who saw her as an equal. A man who never tried to stand over her, only beside her. In 1998, on his 80th birthday, Nelson Mandela did something deeply personal. He proposed to Graça Machel. Not long after, they were married. The ceremony was quiet and intimate. No grand spectacle. Just a small circle of family and close friends, exactly how they wanted it. The media storm came later, of course, but by then, it didn't matter. What they had built together was already strong, far stronger than public opinion. As one family friend put it, she never tried to change him. She only tried to understand him, and in return, he let her in. Graça would later open up about a side of Mandela the world rarely saw. Not the statesman, not the global icon, but the man. She described his humor as boyish, sometimes even mischievous. "We laughed a lot," she said. Not the polished public laugh people saw on camera, but something softer, freer. The kind of laughter that only exists behind closed doors. It revealed a different Mandela, playful, gentle, even a little fragile at times. At first, their age difference raised eyebrows. People couldn't ignore it. But over time, it simply stopped mattering. "We met at a time when we were both settled," Graça explained. "We were grown. We understood the value of companionship, of having a true partner. And because of that, their relationship took on a rare kind of depth. There was no pressure to impress, no need to prove anything. What held their relationship? What kept it going for so long? Keep watching to find out." Nelson Mandela's ex-wife speaks up. He was a rare gift. Just acceptance. "We accept each other as we are," she said, "and we live each day as if it were the last." That mindset shaped everything. It made their love intentional, present, deeply appreciated. For Graça, it made one thing clear. It was a gift to have him as a husband. What truly defined their bond wasn't grand gestures or public moments. It was how they moved through life together, side by side, in thought, in purpose, in quiet companionship. They supported each other's work, often appearing together at conferences, not as a symbol, but as a team. And in that partnership, they found something rare. Not just love, but peace. Even as their relationship grew, Graça Machel was intentional about one thing: holding on to her identity. "I was not just his wife," she said firmly. "I was myself before him, and I remained myself with him." What they shared wasn't the kind of love built on dependency or illusion. It was something deeper, more grounded, a mature love. There was no need to complete each other, only to walk side by side. Looking back, Graça describes their union as a gift, one shaped by grace. At a time when both had experienced deep personal loss, they found something rare in each other: the comfort of being truly seen, not as legends, not as public figures, but simply as people. Now, after years of reflection, she's finally telling her side of the story, not to change history, but to complete it, to shine a light on the kind of love that never made headlines. A love found in quiet glances, in whispered jokes, in the ordinary, everyday moments that made their bond real. Because beyond the titles and global recognition, they were just two people who found peace, not only for their nations, but within each other. Graça recently made a very striking statement in an interview about her husband. She said, "Mandela belonged to the world, but I knew the man." By the time Nelson Mandela married Graça in 1998, he had become more than a former president or even a Nobel laureate. He was a global symbol. His name stood for strength, resilience, and forgiveness. Streets were named after him. Children sang about him in schools. World leaders spoke of him with deep respect. He had moved beyond politics. He had become an icon.
How I am going to be treated, what type of life I was going to spend. These were all in my mind.
Maybe even a myth, but to Graça, he was still just Nelson, the man who loved tending to his garden, the man who teased her about her cooking, the man who left his socks scattered across the bedroom floor. He belonged to the world, she once said. But at night, when the cameras were gone and the speeches were over, he was just my husband, my friend. Graça Machel understood something most people didn't. It's much easier to admire a myth than to truly know a man. Myths don't get tired, they don't forget anniversaries, they don't grow old, fragile, or uncertain. But Nelson Mandela was not a myth. He was human. And in the quiet, private spaces, far away from cameras and crowds, Graça saw all of him. Not just the towering figure who stood against apartheid, but a man growing older, carrying the invisible weight of a lifetime filled with sacrifice. In an interview with CNN, she was once asked if it ever felt overwhelming to be married to someone the world saw as a legend. Her answer was honest. At the beginning, yes, she admitted, there was a kind of conflict between the man I loved and the myth people believed in. She knew him as a person, real, present, human, but the world saw something almost untouchable, and for a while, holding those two versions together was confusing. So, how did she navigate it? What lesson can be learned from how she mastered the art of loving him? Let's see. Loving him beyond life. How she did it. But with time, she learned how to separate them. And through her eyes, a different picture comes into focus. Behind the legend was a man, imperfect, tender, deeply loved. The world celebrated his forgiveness, how he invited former enemies to sit at his table, how he walked out of prison after 27 years and still chose peace. But Graça saw the cost of that forgiveness. She saw the sleepless nights, the flicker of pain when he spoke about comrades who never made it out alive, the quiet, unguarded moments when doubt crept in, when he wondered if stepping down after one term had truly set South Africa on the right path. These were the parts the world didn't see, but she did. And in those moments, he wasn't a symbol. He was just a man carrying everything he had lived through. Graça Machel once reflected that Nelson Mandela didn't regret stepping down from the presidency, but he did wonder, quietly, privately, whether he had been given enough time to fix what was still broken. Even in old age, Mandela remained deeply principled, but he was also unmistakably human. He could be stubborn, impatient, resistant to help. When his hearing began to fade, he often dismissed the idea of using hearing aids, insisting he was fine. Graça would simply smile and gently remind him again and again. She saw all of it. The man who wrote her love letters in careful, elegant handwriting. The man refused to be helped while walking, even as his strength declined. The man who asked for the morning news to be read aloud was afraid he might miss something important. These small details, ordinary, tender, deeply human, were never part of the public myth, but they were part of him. And perhaps, more than anyone, Graça understood the risk of turning a man into a legend. When Mandela passed away in December 2013, the world mourned deeply.
Our beloved Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela has departed. He passed on peacefully.
But for her, the memorial felt less like pure grief and more like a spectacle. World leaders arrived. Security filled the streets. Speeches multiplied, each one trying to define him in the most perfect words possible. Graça stood quietly beside his casket, listening as people spoke about a man many of them had never truly known. People who had never shared a simple meal with him, never sat beside him in silence, never seen his face soften when he heard jazz playing in the background. After the funeral, she stepped back from public life for a time, not out of distance from the world, but because she needed space. Space to grieve, space to breathe, space to recalibrate after a life shared with someone the world had turned into something larger than life. For years, Graça Machel stood beside Nelson Mandela as his companion, caregiver, and confidant. But in the world's imagination, she was often reduced to a supporting role in the larger Mandela story. Now, she is choosing to speak, not only to share her own truth, but to gently correct a one-sided version of his. Nelson wasn't perfect, she once said. He was deeply good, but like anyone, he struggled with anger, with guilt over time lost with his children, and with the pressure of always being expected to be better than everyone else. Why did she speak up so passionately about her late husband? What other things did she reveal about the man, Mandela? Keep watching to find out. At 80, Nelson Mandela's ex-wife finally speaks up about Mandela and reveals what we all suspected. By separating the myth from the man, Graça says she wasn't diminishing him. She was freeing him, allowing the world to see Mandela not as a flawless saint, but as a human being who chose goodness in spite of deep wounds. A man who still carried the scars of prison, who flinched at sudden loud noises. He quietly wept when he returned to Robben Island one last time. And in doing so, Graça also reclaimed her own voice. She was no longer just Mandela's widow or the composed figure standing beside him at official events. She was a witness, a partner, a truth-teller. Her reflections are not an attempt to tear him down. They are an invitation to understand greatness, not as perfection, but as humanity. To admire Mandela not only because he stood tall, but because he sometimes stumbled and still rose again. And beyond global admiration, Graça's quiet memories now offer the most intimate portrait of him, the man who kissed her forehead before sleep, who asked if he looked presentable before public appearances, who held her hand under the table when the room became too overwhelming. Nelson Mandela was not just a strong leader, she said. He was a great husband, and being his wife taught her something deeply human. Even legends get tired. Even giants want to be held. I am not defined by my husbands, she often insisted. For much of her life, Graça Machel has carried the weight of two powerful legacies. First, as the widow of Mozambican revolutionary leader Samora Machel, and later as the wife of Nelson Mandela. To the world, she has often been seen through the lens of the men she loved. But Graça has consistently resisted that framing. Her life, she insists, is her own. "I have loved great men," she once said, "but I am not made great by loving them. I have my own story." And that story began long before global recognition or high-profile marriages. In a world where women are often expected to shrink themselves in the presence of powerful men, Graça chose to remain fully herself. She stood tall, without apology. She believes women can be both soft and strong, loyal and independent, grounded in love, yet still rooted in selfhood. Through her trust and philanthropic work, she continues to support female entrepreneurs across Africa and mentors a new generation of activists, encouraging them not to imitate others, but to find their own voice. In many ways, Graça is also working to free Mandela from the pedestal the world placed him on, not to reduce his greatness, but to humanize it, to show that greatness is not perfection, but persistence, and that ordinary people, from any background or age, can rise to meet extraordinary moments, just as Mandela did. When asked recently what she hopes people remember about her own legacy, she paused, then answered with clarity, "That I lived fully, that I gave my best, that I was more than someone's wife, that I was someone's advocate, someone's teacher, someone's mirror." And perhaps that is her final gift, not only to Mandela's legacy, but to her own. A refusal to be written into history as an accessory, and a quiet demand to finally be seen in full light. Her voice remains calm, poised, but unmistakably firm. Graça Machel knows the myth of Nelson Mandela will endure, but she also believes something just as important. So will the truth of the man. And through her courage to speak now, and to speak clearly, she invites the world to remember that behind every myth lies a human story, one that is raw, beautiful, and deeply imperfect. What about her? How did she rise to become this highly respected woman in society? Let's see. Mandela's ex-wife, origins. Born in 1945 in rural Mozambique, she was the youngest of 6 children in a modest family. Orphaned at a young age and raised in a Catholic mission, she grew up deeply aware of inequality and injustice. That awareness shaped her path. It pushed her toward education, activism, and ultimately revolution. She earned a scholarship to study in Lisbon, Portugal, an extraordinary opportunity for a young black woman from colonial Africa at the time. While there, she became involved in student resistance movements and grew increasingly critical of Portugal's colonial rule over her homeland. When she returned to Mozambique, she joined Frelimo, the liberation movement, and quickly rose through its ranks. By her early 30s, Graça Machel had already become Mozambique's Minister of Education and Culture, making her the first woman in independent Africa to hold such a position. She focused on literacy campaigns, expanding rural education, and improving access to schooling for girls. Her work reshaped the country's education system and earned her international recognition long before she ever met Nelson Mandela. Her marriage to Graça Machel was built on shared ideals and a common vision for a newly independent nation. But tragedy struck in 1986 when Graça died in a mysterious plane crash. In an instant, Graça became a widow.
A monument has since been erected in honor of those who died in a plane crash.
Left to raise 2 children while her country mourned a fallen leader. Rather than step back, she stepped forward. She expanded her global advocacy work, partnering with the United Nations and leading initiatives focused on protecting children in war-torn regions. One of her most influential contributions was her 1996 report, Impact of Armed Conflict on Children, which remains a foundational reference in humanitarian policy today. By the time she married Nelson Mandela in 1998, on his 80th birthday, she was already an established global stateswoman, activist, and leader in her own right. Their union brought together 2 of Africa's most influential post-colonial figures. But Graça was determined not to be overshadowed by Mandela's towering global legacy. She continued her own work while supporting his. She later became Chancellor of the University of Cape Town, co-founded the Elders, an independent group of global leaders promoting peace and human rights, and led multiple foundations focused on education, healthcare, and women's empowerment. As she once explained, "It is the meaning of my life since youth to fight for the dignity and freedom of my people." She was honored by the British monarchy and received numerous honorary degrees, not as Nelson Mandela's wife, but as Graça Machel in her own right. Yet, despite her achievements, the media often framed her success through the men in her life. They would describe her as the only woman to serve as First Lady of 2 countries, or Nelson Mandela's last great love. While factually accurate, such descriptions still placed her identity in relation to the men she loved and buried. More than a decade after Mandela's passing, Graça continues to assert her independence. She speaks openly about love, legacy, and the danger of being reduced to a romantic footnote in someone else's story. "Women are not just vessels for greatness," she once said during a keynote speech in Kigali. "We are breakers of history too." Today, she remains deeply engaged in philanthropic work, focusing on gender equality, maternal health, and youth empowerment across Africa. Through the Graça Machel Trust, she supports African women entrepreneurs, fights against child marriage, and builds networks of female leadership across the continent. What does she spend her life doing now? What keeps this iconic woman going? Keep watching to find out. Mandela's ex-wife, years after he passed. In private, friends describe her as someone who enjoys gardening, poetry, and time with her grandchildren. In public, she is elegant, soft-spoken, but unwavering. She is a strong advocate for African solutions to African challenges and has little patience for symbolic politics. When asked if she still feels the world mainly sees her as Mandela's widow, she simply smiles and replies, "Let them. I know who I am." And perhaps that is her quiet revolution, the ability to stand beside history's giants, while still remaining firmly grounded in her own identity. To love deeply, to lose painfully, and still keep building something meaningful, not out of grief or obligation, but out of passion and purpose. That, in many ways, defines the life of Graça Machel. Her story is not just a footnote in the biographies of 2 famous men. It is a sweeping narrative of resilience, vision, and dignity, one she is finally telling in her own words. In the twilight of her public life, Graça Machel is not trying to rewrite history. She is trying to correct its tone. As tributes to Nelson Mandela grow more polished and reverent with each passing year, she worries that the myth of the man is slowly overshadowing the man himself. And with that comes a deeper concern. The change is being redefined as something only extraordinary, almost mythical people can achieve, not ordinary human beings. Speaking recently in a packed hall in Johannesburg, she said, "Nelson was not just a strong leader. He was a great husband. He was flawed, funny, tender. He had doubts. He changed his mind. He grew. And for her, that is where his greatness truly lay. Not in perfection, but in evolution. Not because he was born a saint, but because he chose every day to become better." This is the message Graça wants the world to hold on to. Not a bronze statue frozen in time, not a flawless revolutionary carved into history books, but a man who wrestled with his ego, who learned to say, "I'm sorry," and who spent his final years trying, in his own way, to heal what politics had broken. To Graça Machel, that version of Nelson Mandela, the husband who asked about her day, who cried over family letters, and who sometimes forgot names, was more powerful than the legend the world sees. In telling her story today, Graça is practicing a different kind of activism. Not one fought in the streets or inside parliaments, but one fought through memory, through narrative. She believes that when leaders are turned into flawless icons, something important is lost. The belief that ordinary people can also create change. We must tell the full stories, she insists. The courage, yes, but also the confusion, the sacrifice, the cost. And in doing so, she reflects on the personal weight behind Mandela's historic choices. His 27 years in prison made him a global symbol of resilience, but also kept him apart from his children during their most formative years. His political journey helped reunite a divided nation, but it also left emotional gaps within his own family. Graça speaks about these realities gently, not as criticism, but as clarity. He could never be fully mine, she admits. He belonged to the people. That was the marriage I agreed to, not just to him, but to his mission. Yet her words carry no bitterness, only understanding. For her, love was never about possession. It was about partnership. Her life with Mandela was filled with long conversations, constant travel, and quiet moments of rest in between.
Nelson Mandela walked to freedom with his then-wife Winnie at his side.
She remembers his humor, his late-night storytelling, and the way he would hold her hand tightly during formal dinners, a small, silent reminder that no matter the crowd, they were in it together. Still, Graça Machel has always emphasized one thing clearly. Being the wife of Nelson Mandela was never a crown she wore. It was a choice she made alongside her own life. I had my projects, my commitments, my children, and my causes, she says. I did not pause those when I married him. That distinction matters deeply to her. How legendary was her husband, Nelson Mandela? Why does his name still reverberate across Africa? Let's see. The legendary Nelson Mandela. Nelson Rolihlahla. Mandela was born on July 18, 1918, and would go on to become one of the most important figures in modern history. He wasn't just a politician, he was a symbol of resistance, resilience, and hope. In 1994, he made history by becoming the first black president of South Africa, following the nation's first fully democratic election. His presidency, which lasted until 1999, focused on healing a deeply divided country and building a future where people of all races could live together as equals. Mandela grew up in the small village of Mvezo, born into the Thembu royal family. He later studied law at the University of Fort Hare and the University of the Witwatersrand. As a young lawyer in Johannesburg, he became increasingly aware of the injustice faced by black South Africans. That awareness pushed him into politics. In 1943, he joined the African National Congress, ANC, and just a year later, he helped form its youth league. At first, Mandela believed in peaceful protest, but as apartheid, a harsh system of racial segregation enforced by the government, tightened its grip. He and others began to rethink their approach. He played key roles in campaigns like the Defiance Campaign of 1952 and the Congress of the People in 1955. Still, the government responded with arrests and trials, including the long-running treason trial. Over time, Mandela became more radical in his thinking. Influenced in part by the South African Communist Party, he helped establish Umkhonto we Sizwe in 1961. This marked a shift from peaceful resistance to armed struggle, targeting government structures rather than people. That decision came with a heavy price. After the Rivonia trial, Mandela was sentenced to life in prison. He would spend 27 years behind bars, years that could have broken him, but instead turned him into a global icon of courage and resistance. Everything began to change in 1990 when President F.W. de Klerk ordered his release. What followed was nothing short of remarkable. Instead of seeking revenge, Mandela chose reconciliation. He worked with de Klerk to peacefully end apartheid and guide the country toward democracy. In 1994, South Africans of all races voted together for the first time, and Mandela was elected president. During his time in office, he focused on unity, introducing a new constitution and supporting efforts like the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which helped the country confront its painful past. When he stepped down in 1999, Mandela didn't disappear from public life. He continued to speak out for justice, equality, and human dignity around the world. His story isn't just about politics. It's about endurance, forgiveness, and the power of choosing peace when revenge would be easier. After becoming president, Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela took bold steps to help South Africa heal from its painful past. One of his most important actions was creating the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. This body was set up to investigate human rights abuses during apartheid and give victims a voice, while also allowing perpetrators to confess their crimes in exchange for possible amnesty. It wasn't perfect, but it helped the country begin to move forward instead of tearing itself apart. On the economic side, Mandela made a surprising choice. Even though he had socialist leanings, he largely kept the existing economic system in place to maintain stability. Beyond South Africa, Mandela also played an important role on the global stage. He acted as a mediator in the trial related to the Pan Am Flight 103 bombing and later served as Secretary General of the Non-Aligned Movement from 1998 to 1999. Today, Mandela is remembered as a global symbol of peace, justice, and moral leadership. He received over 250 awards, including the Nobel Peace Prize. In South Africa, he is deeply respected and often called Madiba, his Thembu clan name, or even the father of the nation. What do you think about the deep truths Mandela's ex-wife shared? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. Thank you for joining us as we looked through the eyes of Mandela's widow and learned the true story of Mandela. We hope you found this video both interesting and inspiring. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Click the next video on your screen to explore more interesting celebrity stories. See you there.